and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. To mark International Migrants Day on the 18th of December, today we reflect on the millions of workers who have left their homes and families to cross borders in search of better opportunities. Now, in Budget 2025, the Malaysia government unveiled a bold proposal to extend mandatory EPF contributions to non-citizen workers. Now, the move is seen to be a step forward in improving worker welfare and aligning Malaysia closer to international labour standards. But for business owners, the measure raises red flags about increased cost and potential economic impacts. So, is this proposal a fair solution to all stakeholders? Well, let's discuss. Joining me now is Gopal Krishnan Nadisan, who is the Secretary General of the Labour Solidarity and Learning Resources Association, which is a broad coalition of 58 Malaysian trade unions and worker organizations from various sectors. Gopal, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just wondering if we can begin our conversation. Maybe you can share a little bit what you make of this proposal, the proposal to make EPF mandatory for non-citizen workers.
Good afternoon, Melissa. Thank you for giving me another opportunity to speak about some very basic labor issues in Malaysia. EPF is indeed as a retirement saving for workers so that they can enjoy financial freedom to a basic level of income upon retirement. Ordinarily, only Malaysians will retire in the country as a non-citizens are typically here in Malaysia working for a defined period of time and return to their home country. However, there are two reasons why I would support retirement savings for non-citizens. The first is that social protection should be accorded to all workers, regardless of whether they are local or foreign workers. Foreign workers should be allowed to withdraw their saving either when they leave the country or upon attaining the age of withdrawal for EPF saving. There will be a mechanism which need to be built to cater for this, though it cannot be too difficult.
Right.
The second reason is where some of these foreign workers eventually end up acquiring Malaysian citizenship. They will need savings when they retire, and if they do not contribute towards EPF when they are non-citizens, their retirement savings will be insufficient. Okay. So these are the reasons why I'm supporting this scheme introduced by the government.
Okay, well, let's look at the argument of increasing the long-term welfare of migrant workers. Migrant workers already face challenges of low wages, job insecurity. If there's now mandatory EPF contribution both from employee and employer, wouldn't that mean a reduction in terms of their take-home pay? Wouldn't that further strain their immediate financial needs?
Okay. Coming back to this issue, the matter of insufficient take-home pay is not a concern for foreign workers alone and extend to local workers as well. When we need to evaluate is whether workers' wages, in particular for B40 and M40 communities, are sufficient to afford a decent standard of living. It is evidently not the case, and more holistic wages and labor reform must be instituted by the government for this purpose. It was recently reported in Parliament by Finance Minister 2, Yang Berhormat Hamzah Azizan, that 4 million contributors representing 30.5% of those under 55 had withdrawn EPF saving from the flexible account since May of this year. This is a big problem for Malaysia. It simply means that people need to borrow from their retirement savings for their everyday living requirements.
Okay, right.
Needless to say, social, economic, and political issues are being kicked down over the road.
Okay, so what you're saying is that low wages affect us all, and that it's no excuse to not allow for EPF contributions for non-citizen workers. The business community, some of the business community have countered this argument and said they cannot realistically absorb the 12 to 13% EPF contribution for non-citizen workers without making sacrifices in terms of cutting jobs or reducing wages. They're concerned. What do you make of this argument, of this backlash? Do you think that there should be a consideration for some businesses to not be part of this, or do you think it should be a blanket rule? What do you think, Gopal?
This is expected as a businessman. And in particular, big business have grown accustomed to abusing the system so that they can make huge profit. Business need to be socially accountable. The reason given by the business when social protections or reforms of any kind is proposed is that it eats into their profit. They talk of a free market without wanting to acknowledge that they are extracting resources from the country and from the ordinary Malaysian to operate their business. Unfortunately, there has been an unholy alliance between big business and the government. Again, I want to reiterate, there is an unholy alliance between big business and the government. I'm hoping that the reform agenda of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim will rebalance this equation and allow for all Malaysians to benefit from this economic progress of the country.
Gopal, you mentioned big businesses, but what about small businesses? What about SMEs, which make up the bulk of the Malaysian economy? What about micro SMEs who are already operating on very thin margins? Should there be exemptions for smaller businesses?
Whether SMEs or even big business, practically most of them very much depending on the migrant workers in this country simply because it's a very cheap labor. Okay, and so though I have quoted that big business, but practically this is what happening in the country. Everybody very much want migrant workers to be here because the cost is going to be over the period it was cheap, and that is why they are a bit concerned with the EPF contribution. Their profit margin will be reduced. That's all. Again and again, only the profit margin will be reduced. They are not going to lose any business out of this.
Okay, I want to look at the practicalities of this proposal. This is for documented migrant workers in Malaysia, but Malaysia has millions of undocumented the migrant worker population in Malaysia is estimated to be in the millions. So I'm just wondering, how do we think about that? The fact that there is this shadow economy, are we concerned that having this proposal could drive more workers into informal or undocumented labor, or create this further divide between those who come in through the system and are documented versus those who are, trafficked or brought in through other areas, other suspicious and dodgy ways?
Yeah, this is a real issue. As undocumented workers do not have any social protection, this group of people who are human beings are most vulnerable to all forms of exploitation. Employers who engage undocumented workers must be held accountable by the law. Apart from exploiting this vulnerable group, they also cause other issues such as depression of wages in the country. The government should make the matter of dealing with this issue of undocumented workers as a priority. I strongly believe that should be the way.
Okay. So are you concerned? Do you think this proposal will materialize, will be implemented in the coming year or so?
Yes, if the government is serious in it, when I say government, including those agencies who are taking care of the workers, I believe that this issue should be able to handle. In fact, though we say undocumented migrant workers in the country, at one point of time, all these workers enter the country as documented migrant workers. And why they become undocumented? Because employers are only interested in their profit margin, and they exploit them by not providing a proper shelter, proper wages, and other things. So the government has to come up with a proper policy to cater for this group of workers, I believe.
So the actually the mandatory EPF contribution will reduce the ability for exploitation of migrant workers.
Exactly. See, at the moment, once someone enter the country and EPF contribution is already started, the government can monitor this group of workers who are here for this A company, whether continue to be there or otherwise. At the moment, today they can work in A company, tomorrow they can transfer to B company. We can stop with this compulsory EPF contribution for the migrant workers. Once there is no contribution, then what happened to the employer, the migrant worker? So this is another way of trying to reduce the exploitation on the migrant workers.
Right. Gopal, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. I appreciate your time. That was Gopal Krishnanadhisan from the Labour Solidarity and Learning Resources Association. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the proposal that was made in Budget 2025 to extend mandatory EPF contribution to include non-citizen workers. Joining me on the show now is Professor Niaz Asadullah, who is the Southeast Asia lead of the Global Labour Organization. Professor Niaz, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. What do you make of this proposal to extend EPF contributions to include non-citizen workers? I'm wondering how this might impact or reshape Malaysia's labour market dynamics.
Thanks, Melisa, for having me. I see this as a step in the right direction and at the right time. For me, the proposal is as much about equity and worker dignity as it is about structural change and modernization of Malaysian economy. For too long, Malaysian businesses have relied on low wages. But this wage advantage wasn't because of a competitive labor market. If anything, it was an outcome of an implicit contract between the state and business elites, which took the form of combination of policies governing employment and pay conditions in Malaysian labor market. It worked not just by ensuring plentiful supply of foreign workers, the provisions for those workers were unequal, and these two facts combined to present them artificially, if I may say so, as cheaper alternatives to local workers. The economics here was simple. Government's own policies governing foreign labor became a source of hidden subsidies for local businesses. So economically, it made perfect sense for local business owners to hire more foreign workers. The trouble is that this dual track system caused numerous problems for the government as it tried to modernize the economy. Domestically, it has been labeled as one of the reasons why we are stuck in a low wage, low productivity equilibrium. But the bigger damage is our international reputation and image. We are now seen as an economy that is thriving by exploiting workers. There are too many stories of labor-related corruption, apparently there is a transnational syndicate profiting from illicit trade of workers. There is even a UN report on this. So we are talking about a large shadow labor market, which has also made it very difficult for Malaysian government to formalize business practices. So this is the bigger context in which I'm evaluating this recent move, the proposal to make EPF mandatory for non-citizen workers. And again, this is one of the many steps that the government is undertaking currently to make Malaysia ready for competing, in the global labor market in terms of not just hiring white-collar workers, but also blue-collar workers. And again, there is enormous pressure globally for all countries to kind of take the agenda of decent jobs for everyone, everywhere, the ILO convention. And again, I see Malaysia's recent move as another attempt to align itself, to send a message to everyone, particularly to the international business community, that, hey, we are very much open for business, but on equal terms, competitive basis.
Right. Well, so that's kind of the message being sent out to the global business community. But locally, domestically, the businesses and industry are unhappy. I would say largely or generally unhappy with this proposal. They've come to say that this isn't fair, and they've asked for an extension in terms of implementation, when this will be implemented, and also exemptions for some of the businesses in the sectors. How do you see this? What do you make of the backlash, first of all, and how can we get businesses, or how can government get businesses to get on board with this proposal?
Well, this backlash is expected, but it's a very familiar pattern because businesses have historically opposed reforms like minimum wage hikes and other mandatory benefits, citing concerns about rising costs. Even though as a nation, we have paid the price in terms of lost productivity and lower wages everywhere. And again, the way I see it is that this opposition highlights an entrenched preference for cost-cutting through labor exploitation rather than investing in productivity and modernization efforts. And I think this is where we need a change. Employers should recognize that fair labor practices are not just ethical, but they also make good business sense in the current climate. Now, I say current climate for two reasons. One is the global demand for ESG-related concerns, but the bigger reason is the fact that Malaysian economy is at a critical juncture. We are seeking greater integration into the global economy. We are close to becoming a high-income nation. So therefore, I don't see much choice for our businesses. They have to upgrade their practices and mindset. Our Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, has sent a very clear message that the status quo of hidden subsidy and dual practices is over, not just in the labor market, pretty much everywhere. And this is why we have the Madani campaign. Everyone is talking about taking up the new industrial master plan 2030. And we have positive tailwind in terms of optimism about Malaysia's second economic takeoff. So, the days of plantation sector, is over. We are talking about global tech giants coming into Malaysia, investing in microchips and big data industries. Local business leaders need to accept this new reality. It's time to align their local labor practices with global standards. They need to really champion the agenda of decent work for all instead of delaying reforms in the guise of cost-related concerns.
Right. But so the proposal, as you say, we're on the right track. This is the right this is the right trajectory to move forward. But we have to get the details right in the implementation of this. So Niaz, think through the policy mechanisms and the enforcement measures that must first be in place to ensure that there are no loopholes for non-compliance, that it in fact does increase the benefits for migrant workers and their welfare.
No, absolutely. This is where Malaysia always has a challenge. We are very good for proposing policies and introducing policies, and then we worry about what is called implementation failure. And it's pretty much everywhere, labor, non-labor policies. So now, as I reflect on this challenge, there are two sides to it. One is, migrant worker perspectives. They have low capability, and then they also lack power. They lack digital financial literacy. There is lack of awareness about their legal rights. So if we are introducing this new provision for mandatory EPF savings, we have to make sure that we actually teach the workers how to access their EPF accounts online, how to verify whether their employers have made the contribution on time, and also whether their own deductions are being deposited as required each month. And then when it is time to leave, whether they can be assured that, well, they will be able to take the money overseas without being trapped in another round of bureaucratic hassle. Now, the other side of the challenge is coming from employers. So they need to be assured that the government is ready, that the EPF is competent, that they don't want this to be another source of friction, having to run into disputes with employees, even when they have made the payment, or employees are also in anxiety about this. So I think that's where we have a challenge, and this is where we need EPF to show leadership, to reach out to business communities, to provide a clear plan, as well as to assure them about their capacity and the fact that this will really be a new era for everyone, not another source of bureaucratic hurdle.
All right. Niaz, I'm thinking through the realities of the Malaysian labour market, and while we have quite a significant portion of documented migrant workers, there's also many undocumented migrant workers. Could there be unintended consequences of this proposal in terms of making hiring migrant workers less attractive for businesses and potentially creating a shadow labor market, creating more businesses looking for undocumented or informal labor?
Yes, this is a double-edged sword. What the government is trying to do is to kind of force businesses to formalize the way they hire labor, the way they reward them, so that the relative gap in the way we reward workers, foreign or local, is removed. But at the same time, this is also where we see that every time there's a reform, this creates perverse incentives, so pushes employers into the shadow market. So therefore, for this to change this time, the government really has to get it right, that it cannot be piecemeal, that when we are talking about increasing minimum wage, when we are talking about this mandatory EPF contribution, the inspection has to be very rigorous across the board so that employers cannot cut corner. And this is something where EPF alone cannot work. The immigration department also has to coordinate so that, no one can go undetected working in Malaysia as undocumented workers. But otherwise, of course, as you rightly put out, that we may, instead of seeing a reduction in undocumented workers, we may see a rise. And that would be really not an outcome that anyone would desire.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Niaz, for being on the show with me today. I appreciate your time. That was Professor Niaz Asadullah, the Southeast Asia lead of the Global Labour Organization, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.